All right, welcome back. We are COMP229 in the summer 2021 semester at Centennial, and it's week 2, part 1 of our broadcast. And today we're going to be talking about kind of an intro to MeanStack and a little bit of what Node.js is and TypeScript too. So let's get into that. So we're sitting at week 2, and last week we did all this stuff, and this week we're going to be talking about that. I'm also going to be in a separate video today. I've actually recorded the video for you already. Assignment 1 has been posted and is due 2 short weeks from now on week 4, and that's June 4th, Friday, June 4th, 2021 at midnight. So that's an individual assignment that you'll be asked to do. Again, the first half is all individual. So those are the things that you're going to be asked to do for week 4, week 6, and week 7. Okay, so all the due dates should be updated now up on the Centennial shell. I know I had some people coming to me and saying, you know, the due dates are a little older. Can you update them? And I did that. So they're all updated with the latest due dates. But take a look at the weeks. The weeks haven't changed, and they're not going to change with the stuff that I've kind of shared with you last week. So what did we do last week? We talked about Visual Studio Code. What is that? It's an editor and why we're using it. Version control at length. We went into what is version control, Git and GitHub, and the difference between the two. We talked about how to install Node.js. I asked you to do an installation of MongoDB. Again, we'll handle this around week 4 or 5 anyway, as we move into full CRUD with MongoDB. MongoDB is a JavaScript-based or kind of database we're going to be talking about. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. It's weird. Hopefully that we don't bounce in and off. But if it does, needless to say that it's being recorded on YouTube, so worst case scenario, you can watch it there. All right, let's continue. So again, how to deal with errors after the installation, that kind of stuff. We talked about that. Downloading third-party NPM modules. We reviewed some basic JavaScript concept, and I said that, hey guys, whatever you do, never use var, because var is a bad thing to do. So please don't use var, is what I asked you guys to do. And then we also talked about TypeScript really briefly last week. So these are all the things we kind of did last week as we were kind of explaining, you know, what the course is about and that kind of thing. Any questions at all around last week? Any concerns? I also sent you guys, by the way, an email around Lab 1. I talked about how Lab 1 was a bonus lab, and what you'd be doing with Lab 1 is basically going through the practice that we talked about last week. And the practice is basically you following along with me with the stuff that I've done on YouTube. So if I post a video on YouTube, and I do that every single week, my expectation is that you'd have a chance, at least either in class or on your own, to go through the details that I've talked about with you during your own time. So every week, like I said, there are posted details, and I'm going to record everything on the Monday, except for next week. So next week, because of Victoria Day, as it falls on the Monday, I will be recording classes for sections. Actually, this is incorrect. It's actually section 2 and 3 on the Monday. So for sections 2 and 3, I'll be recording everything on the Wednesday that next week, because there's no class on Monday next week. So just keep that in mind. Next week is a very important week in terms of the stuff that we're doing together. And the reason for that is because we talked about Express. There's a lot of details coming forward from Monday or next week on. And remember that you need everything that I've given you in the course shell on week 3, because by week 4, everything is due. And I'll talk about what I'm looking for in your assignment at the end of this, towards the end of this lecture. Okay. So that's what you need to do. So please, you know, again, today is another kind of intro week. More than anything else, I'll be talking about TypeScript and Node.js and what that is and how to get it and how to download it and install it and all that stuff, and how to also improve things with Visual Studio Code and some of the extensions that I use. You know, all those kind of things are the things that I'm going to be sharing with you. Okay, so that's the kind of the stuff that we're doing over the next couple weeks. All right, any questions or concerns about anything that the schedule, how it looks so far today? Okay, again, I'll be going over this with sections. You guys are section 3. I'll be talking about the same thing with section 2 and with section 4 on Wednesday. Okay, let's continue. So we talked about all this stuff, and this week, what are we doing? We're talking about what the mean stack is, because we're going to be kind of putting together pieces of the mean stack week over week. And we're going to start with Node.js. What is NPM, and that kind of thing. This is all stuff that's detailed inside of your course shell. So I'm going to skip over a lot. The expectation is, of course, that you do some of this yourself, that there is a little bit of reading and checking through the course. So if you go through the course shell, when we kind of made this work, I don't know why it says, hopefully you guys can see this. I don't know why it says begins September, but let's just change this to, that's weird. That's really weird. It should say really, it doesn't matter how many times I changed it a couple times now already. It's all right, but it should do that, right? And it shouldn't start at 3. It should start like way at 8 o'clock. That's the first time I've seen that. All right, doesn't matter. But yeah, it should have been visible to you today anyway. So hopefully that's okay. And there it goes again. See? Let me just try that again. Sorry. Just want to make sure, for whatever reason, that that this is updated so that it shows 8 o'clock this morning. That's weird. Okay. Update. All right. Oof. That was bizarre. Okay, let's continue. So you get your overview, and I just want to step you through the course shell again, and then take a look at the activities for this week. So it goes through an introduction to mean. It also talks about a couple of video tutorials. One of them is getting started with Node.js. The expectation is that you have access to LinkedIn Learning. So if you clicked on getting started with Node.js, there's a lot of LinkedIn Learning videos that are built in, and this one here is the one from me. All right, so this is one of the ones that I asked you guys to do, and it talks about the same kind of stuff that I'm going to talk about today. It's going to go over with you as well, and this is from the last time we did this course in the fall of 2020, but it's still relevant today. All right, so that's what that is. It also goes through what the assignment 1 Express Portfolio piece is all about, right? So please make sure you go there. So that's what this is, intro to mean, what event-driven programming is, and those kind of things. Okay, so that's the structure of this week. So please, if you haven't had a chance to do that, go through the structure that I've posted for you in here, and I'm going to go through the rest, one step at a time. All right, so a couple of things about mean. What is mean? Mean stands for Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. You can kind of replace Angular with React if you so want to, or Vue. So it can be MERN, M-E-R-N, or Mevin, M-E-V-N, or other ones. There's other front-end frameworks. So the Angular piece is the front-end framework, right? That's what we're going to talk about later on this semester. Then we have Express, which is your middleware, MongoDB, which is your database, and of course Node.js, which is the foundation of everything. All right, that's how it goes. So one of the things that there's an advantage about using this framework, this solution stack is what we've called it, is it uses a single language throughout the entire application process. And whereas in other solution stacks, for example, let's look at the AMP stack. So that's AMP. The AMP stack is Apache, MySQL, and PHP, right? You need to know those languages, Apache on the backend server, MySQL, you have to know SQL query language. So that's structured query language, you need to know that. And you need to know PHP plus JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. All right, so that's all the stuff that you need for the AMP stack. And whereas with the mean stack or the MERN stack or the Mevin stack, all you need to know is pretty much JavaScript everywhere. And then, of course, CSS and HTML. So the mean stack, we use MongoDB as a scalable database. That's what it is. It's JSON-like in structure. And Express is this web application framework that we're going to be using. And again, for your project, which is going to be released in the second half of semester, I'm only expecting you to use Express. If you want to push yourself, you can certainly use Angular. Angular is more challenging for those people who want to do web application development as their main thing after their graduation. So I'm not going to push Angular on you. I'm going to recommend Express, right, as an example. And then if you want to do Angular, there's videos associated with Angular in the second half. Okay, so whereas Node.js is required, it's using something called Google Chrome's V8 JavaScript runtime. That's what it was built upon, and it was way back in the day. So again, if you notice, we can look at the LAMP stack, like we talked about. Here's a kind of an analogy to the mean stack. Linux is like having Node.js. That's the platform. Apache is like Express, kind of. That's not really true. MySQL and MongoDB kind of are, relative. PHP or Python or Perl is kind of with Angular as the front-end user interface. So that's kind of an analogy of how things work together. There's also the merge stack that we talked about before, where we just replace React.js instead of Angular. Okay, so that's that. Really, the great advantages is it's got a lot of high performance compared to what we've seen in the past with PHP. One of the things is it uses something called non-blocking I/O, as well as what it also does is it uses an event-driven system to do everything. I want you to also think about it in terms of layers. So you have your data, your model, your presentation, your view, and your logic with the controller. We're going to be using the model view controller structure to create this 3-tier architecture for our application over the course of the semester. I have a question up here. Patrick says, is there still a decent job market that uses Express? I only notice a lot of Angular requirements. Well, you know what? Express is just a lightweight framework. Angular is definitely where you'd want to go. But I think you can learn a lot with Express because of the endpoints you're going to be creating. So would you only want to use Express and learn Express? I think if you're going to take it further, I think using something like Angular would be good, or React. I think you should know at least one of those two when you're done college. Okay, so that's my answer to that one. Again, only if that's where your focus is going to be. So popular paradigm that I just talked about with this idea of model view controller, where you have a separation of concerns. You have your view that handles the presentation layer, your controller that kind of connects the model, which is a class that connects to the data, and your view. So that's the controller that kind of runs behind, almost like the logic behind the view and the database. That's what the controller is. And so it kind of looks like this model view controller with the user basically saying, hey, I need a page. The controller accesses the model and in turn updates the view, which returns details to the user. So that kind of love triangle, if you will. Okay, so that's kind of the way it works. So again, lots of stuff has changed over the last little while. That's what this page is saying. And we've had the AMP stack and the .NET stack, and actually previous versions of this course use the .NET stack, but no longer. And here we give you different ideas of different solution stacks that are very popular. I have to tell you still that a LAMP or some variation of AMP, so Apache, MySQL, PnP, can have WAMP, XAMPP, LAMP, and so on. And MAMP, if you're using a Mac, as an example, they're different solution stacks, but they're all the same thing. And they use Apache, MySQL, and PHP. There's probably about 70% of backend websites right now still use PHP, okay, in one form or another, all right? Not Python or Perl, but PHP, okay? That's where the majority of the LAMP stacks, the stuff that's out there right now. And that's okay, but PHP is on the decline, slowly. They've come up with different frameworks like Laravel, which is an object-oriented framework for PHP that adds functionality and extends the language, and that's great. But still, it's on a decline in terms of where it was, let's say, 10 years ago. Right. So that's that. And let's talk about Node.js and what that is. So back in 2009, Ryan Dahl he kind of presented Node.js on JS Conference EU, which is kind of cool. He talked about how asynchronous JavaScript and XML, that was what it was called before, Ajax. Now we just simply call it AJAX. We don't say asynchronous JavaScript and XML anymore. It's just AJAX. And this idea of two-way data binding that he was having a problem solving. And so he proposed this idea that we can use the Google Chrome engine, which got very, very fast around 2008, right, to actually supercharge our front ends and back ends. And we can create these non-blocking sockets to create a server on the back end with JavaScript. And of course, Node.js was born back in 2008. So again, what they've created is something called the JavaScript execution engine, which is Node.js, and it's scalable. By 2014, there was a conflict between Joyent, this is a bit of background, and the company that owned at the time Node.js, and a group of core contributors. They split and they created something else called io.js, and eventually they came back together to make Node.js again. So they kind of split up and came back, and then finally now they have Node.js, and it's been really progressing quickly over the last several years. Okay, so what we use here with Node.js is we use JavaScript's event-driven nature, right? And the way it works with JavaScript is, and we've done this before, we have an event listener that we kind of add event listener. And when we do a click event, or as an example, this is constantly listening. It creates its own separate event queue that is triggering. And what this is using is something similar to something called the observer pattern, and where you have an observer and you're observing an observable. The observable will be, say, the button. When the observable raises an event, like for example the click event, then what ends up happening is the observer notifies all of its subscribers. So if you add an event listener as an example to show name button, then the observer, the event listener, notifies show name button, and then what you can have is something called an event handler that handles the event. So this part here is the event handler, and this part is the event listener. You're listening for a click, you're handling it after it's clicked with something else. That's typically how we do events in JavaScript. And similarly, we're going to do the same thing with a server. So that's what's going to happen. But instead of using it add event listener, it's going to be implied, as you'll see later on. Okay, so we have something called an event loop, and the way it works is you have event emitters that you add to the event queue, and then what happens is the event loop keeps triggering. It has almost like its own thread that's running, and then you have event handlers that listen for any changes to the event queue. And when the event queue has, for example, an emitter, like a listener emits an event, it enters the event queue, it goes into the event loop, the event handler sees it, and then it responds. Okay, that's how it normally works. And that's how it works for Node.js as well. Okay. So Node.js is an event-driven programming language. Node.js is a system, if you will, platform. I misspoke. And here's an example of PHP, the way it works. We use select statements and so on. And Node.js doesn't do that at all. What it does is it uses, so again, the old system with PHP used something called a thread pool system. And that was, again, what we were thinking about was, how the thread pools were more efficient, but actually it caused quite a bit of overhead. So here's an example of Apache, which is what's running PHP, in Nginx. That's what it's called. When you see something like this, Nginx is how you pronounce it. Nginx is a server type that supports Node.js. And you can see that for the number of concurrent connections, as the number of concurrent connections increase, you can see that the requests per second that PHP can handle start to go down, 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 because the memory goes up, up, up. Right. So as there's more concurrent connections, the memory requirements for Apache keeps going up. Whereas, you can see that as we get increased number of concurrent connections with Nginx, you can see that it maintains fairly good stability throughout the entire number of thousands of connections. And you can see that from a memory perspective, it keeps very stable. So this is why, Nginx and Node.js' backend is truly, or something like it, will be truly the future of web development. Okay, so that's how we move forward. So let's talk about NPM. NPM is a package manager that works with Node, and it uses something called a registry of packages. And what you do is you register your packages with NPM, and then what you can do as a developer is you can look up a package that someone in the community or a group in the community has created. You can download this successful package, a package that's been tested thoroughly for the most part, and include it in your own web development, as opposed to going online. This is the old way of doing things. Let's say going to something like jQuery or Bootstrap or whatever, downloading it manually and installing it in on your pages. We're not going to do it that way going forward. Instead, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using NPM or Yarn, which is kind of a smaller package manager wrapper. That's what Yarn really is, to download and install packages and install them in our application framework that we're going to make. Okay. So what we do is there's usually some kind of there's two modes. We can use a local. There's actually a third mode too. This doesn't talk about, but there's usually a local mode and a global mode. There's also an execution mode that you can use. MPX is another way of doing it. But local, what does is if you use NPM and you install it locally, it only works for that project. Or you can install it globally like we did last week. So for example, things like Light Server and NodeMon and a bunch of other things we did globally, that works for every project. Okay, so that's kind of two ways of installing it for packages. And normally how it works is this: hey, NPM. NPM is the package manager, and then there's some kind of verb, and the verb in this case would be install or remove or whatever. And then the package name is really what we put there, whatever the unique package name is, and that installs it locally, right? Or we can use npm install -g, and -g says, I want to make it global. So it's available to all projects, is what we did last week. Okay, so that's kind of what we did. So here's some examples. npm install express you can use to kind of get the latest version, or you can specify a version by putting the @ symbol as well as the version number. So if I wanted to specify a certain version, for example, of the package that we have online, a lot of these packages are on GitHub as well, we can target that version and it'll download that and install it into your web application, as opposed to the latest version, which could have breaking changes or changes that you don't want in your application. Okay, so that's something we have control over that. You can also use uninstall as an example, and I'm just not going to go into all this. Just going to keep going across things. We use something called a package.json file in our folder structure. Package.json is the thing that keeps track of all of our project dependencies. And there's two types of dependencies. One of them is a project dependency, and the other one is a developer dependency. A project dependency is something that we need to run the project. Without it, you can't make your files go. Whereas a developer dependency is only something that you need for code hinting. For example, if I want to use TypeScript, I might have a developer dependency. TypeScript is not required for me to run Node.js, but it helps us, and that's why we use it. Okay, so that's, package.json. And this is what it would look like. It would be a JSON file, and basically what you'd have is a name of your project, like mean, the version that you'd want to specify, and there would be a section here, an object for dependencies, and one of them could be something like express. Okay. And then the way we start off, we want to generate the package.json file. We do that by doing an npm init. That's what it does. And when we do that, it actually steps us through a little wizard that allows us to, a batch file wizard that allows us to pull together the package itself. That's what it does. Okay, so that is that. Sometimes we use also npm update to update to the latest version of certain packages. Again, be careful with this. Sometimes it can mess up your code because some packages don't work well with others, and we have to understand the effects of that. So please be careful doing an update. I'd recommend not doing it unless you know what you're doing. And then the other thing we want to do a lot of times when we use npm is use --save as a option at the end. And minus save updates the package.json file that we talked about before with the package that you're including in the file. Okay, so I'll talk about that today as we move forward. I'm not going to cover CommonJS. That's for you to read. I'm going to go over to Node.js core modules. And before we get into that, I'm going to invite you to pull up our Visual Studio Code again. So I'm going to go to my desktop. So let's go and open the desktop. So this is where the example comes up right now. So I'm going to go to my desktop and I'm going to go to Centennial and COMP229. Did I do new folder? I did. Oh my gosh. That should be week 1. I don't know how it happened. Let's move into week 1C. That's you guys, because you guys are group 3. So we're going to go instead of week 1C. That's what we did last week. I want to start something completely new this week because now we're doing something different. So again, I'm going to right click and make a new folder. So please follow along if you can. And we're going to call this week 2C. So that is you guys. Okay. So with week 2C, we're going to do this again. And I'm doing it again because I think it's good for repetition. So I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code, not Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, all right? And then I'm going to drag and drop week 2C in there, all right? So here's week 2C, and what I want you to do is we're going to start off slightly differently than we did last week. So what we did last week was we kind of made a basic application with an index.html as well as we also used an app.js file. So we're still going to do something like that, but we're going to get into it a little slower. So one thing we're going to do is I'm going to get you guys to add a new file. We're going to call this index.js, all right? So here's index.js. And this is where our stuff is going to live. We're not going to need an HTML file right now, okay? But this is the first thing we're going to do. And what I invite you to do is take a look at nodejs.org. So if you go to nodejs.org, and if you look at docs, and if you look at the latest version, 16.1.0 API, or guides, that's a good way to start. If you go to Getting Started Guide, you're going to see a bit of code that we're going to talk about. So let's grab this piece of code. Again, this is in the nodejs.org, and if you go to Docs and then Guide and then Getting Started Guide, you're going to see this. So I'm going to grab all this, and I'll go through what all this stuff means in a second, and I'm going to grab it and paste it inside of my Visual Studio Code. So right up here. Whoop, there we go. All right, so let's take a look and see what all of this means. So first of all, we're using const. Remember I said no var anymore in our code. We're specifying a host name, all right, as an example, as well as a port. And then we're using the new fat arrow function right here as an example and what we're doing with this one is we're basically saying, let's create a server and stuff like that. But the problem is when we go through this, we get some response, but look, if I hover over HTTP, it says the module is HTTP. If I go over host name, it says my host name is some kind of host name, and the port is 3000. And this is okay, but 127 is kind of like your host, so this could be your website. Port is the port. We're using port 3000 here. And when I use server, when I do HTTP create server, this is actually instantiating on an object of type HTTP, right? That's what it's doing. And we have these two pieces here, which is a request object and a response object. Okay, so that's what this is. I'm just going to put these on separate lines. I like putting my curly braces kind of on top of each other like this. And the reason for this is you can see that there is a line between these. I'm going to talk about Visual Studio and some of the extensions that I use for you guys to use as well. Okay, so there's this. So I can see here I'm creating the server, and once my server is created, the only thing that it's going to do is it's going to set up my header for my page, which is the content type as text plain, and I'm going to respond. So this is the response object that we talked about before. There's two objects, the request object, that's the user requesting something, and the server responding with something. the server is going to respond with a hello world. That's what's going to be showing on the web page. Okay, and the way it works is this. You're going to see that we also have a listener. This listener with Node.js, it's very similar to add event listener on JavaScript that we've used before. And basically, listener takes two things. It takes an optional port. So question mark, whenever you see question mark like this, it means optional. So it takes an optional port number as well as a optional host name, which is a string, right? And then a listening listener, which is really a callback function to respond after something happens. So when I'm listening something, and if I have something coming inbound, then I'm listening. I can, and once it's running, when I'm listening, I can kind of specify where I'm listening to. Notice we also have a console log. The console log, typically what you would normally see is console log would go to the website, the web page. But in this case, actually, it goes to the console. Okay, so that's kind of a very high level of how this all works. Notice on the bottom left-hand corner here, I have an update to Visual Studio Code. I'm just going to go here and restart to update for a second. And this is good to do before we get going, because I think it's important for us to have the latest version of Visual Studio Code together. So if you have the same message, please update. When you launch Visual Studio Code, you'll notice also that for the most part, unless it craps out like this, looks like mine's crapping out for some reason now. And I mean that is like not working properly. So forgive me when I say that, but there it is. It's finally updated. When you update it, then what happens is it loads it again and you have the latest version, which is good. Okay, on the left, notice I want to talk about here, before we get moving on this, I want to talk about some extensions for as to how my stuff might look different than yours. And you might see some other things down here which you don't have that I've included. I'm going to talk about the extensions that I recommend that you get right now on the video so that it can help you with some of the stuff that kind of code hinting and help in Visual Studio Code when programming for Node.js. Okay, so on the left, let's click this extensions. And notice I have all these things installed, okay? And there's also some suggestions down here in terms of recommended. I'm not installing these right now, but I'm going to go over the things that I think you need. So I have Emoji Sense installed. I didn't install this manually. It's part of a larger package for sure. But let's look at this first one, if you're going to look at this one. And by the way, you can search for them up here. If I want something like Emoji Sense, I can type in emoji, and then if I type in the whole thing, you're going to see that it comes up as a match. And then what you can do, you'll have an install button. One thing to note is if you're looking for things to help you with code hinting and that kind of stuff in Visual Studio Code, you'll notice that there's a number of downloads. This is the number of downloads, 148,000 kind of points to this as being a pretty active package. So as an example, if I wanted to include emojis inside of my code, I could do that. I'm not really someone who uses emojis for my code, but if you really wanted to, you could. Okay, so that's Emoji Sense. And again, I told you it's probably installed by something else. So let's go back to this one. This one is an important one to add. So please, if you're going to add anything, we're going to be using EJS starting probably next week. So please download and install .ejs 0.0.1 as an extension for Visual Studio Code. So that you can see again, you have about 100,000 downloads, pretty busy, but it hasn't moved since its beginning. It's still at version 0.0.1 because there's not much in terms of what it needs to do to support for EJS. EJS is something that we're going to be using with Express when we get to that starting next week. All right, the next one is JSDoc. So JSDoc is kind of documentation for JavaScript, and you can see that it adds quick documentation. Highly recommend download and install JSDoc, where it says add JSDoc comments to your code. Again, 161,000 downloads and highly rated. I recommend it. All right. It says all autocomplete, and I think this is pretty cool. But it's primarily, if you notice, it works for Mac and Linux, and it does autocomplete based on all the open editors. So whatever the open editors are, I think this is a good one. Again, 228,000 downloads. So that's one thing I'd recommend. I'm going to skip the Angular ones right now. There's Angular extensions, but you won't need them until we get into Angular. And I've installed quite a few Angular extensions. I'm going to keep going down until I get to the ones that I think you need. Auto close tag. I think this is pretty cool. Sometimes, though, I have to tell you that it interrupts what I'm doing when I do an auto close tag, and you'll see sometimes it might mess me up, but this is a good one to have. Again, 4 million downloads. There's a pretty busy one again. So auto close tag is one that I recommend. Auto imports, I would say that's probably okay, but nothing. I'm not saying I'm going to recommend that. Auto rename, again, that's pretty cool. If I kind of change the name of the one tag, it automatically renames the other one, the backend. I think that's a really good one when we're programming with HTML and XML. So again, 5 million downloads plus. I recommend this one, auto rename tag, which is pretty cool. Let's keep going. I'm going to move past Azure. Babylon.js failed. Beautify. Beautify is really good. I use Prettier, but Beautify is another kind of way of making your stuff look nice. So that's pretty good. I recommend that. So Beautify, again, 6 million downloads. So again, very, very busy. Bookmarks, I always include. That's this. So bookmarks, again, it's 1.4 million downloads. Recommend this one. Bootstrap 4, you can hold off on this one. We'll talk about that. Bracket pairs is really good. This is one I use. You can see that bracket pairs, that's why my brackets look color-coded like this. And I think it helps you when you do Visual Studio Code and use bracket pairs just like this. And there's a couple of versions, bracket pair colorizer 1 and bracket pair colorizer 2. I recommend getting both of them, right? So covers more kind of extensibility. C, C++ you don't need. C# you don't need because we're not doing C#. Can I use is pretty cool, but not required for this course. Or chat, or checkpoints, or CMake, or Code Runner, or any of the things that you see here. If you really wanted to, you could, but I don't really recommend that you need them all. Code Tour is pretty cool. Again, you can walk through your code base. You can record and playback a guided tour to stuff if you really want to. For recording, it's not bad. Code Tour, again, but it's pretty small, 56,000 downloads. Anything lower than 1 million usually is not as maintained. Complete JS doc tags, again, very low. I use that, but that's just me. Composers for PHP, you don't need it. Control snippets, customize UI. Debugger, this is important. Debugger for Chrome. We're going to be using this one quite a bit. So download and install Debugger for Chrome. Again, 7 million downloads. It was made by Microsoft, so you can know that it's a pretty good one to use. All right, so that's that one. Just going to get rid of that and go back to Debugger for Chrome. Just going to skip down to that. All right, and then Debugger for Firefox. Obviously, I want both. Sometimes you want to compare with both Firefox and Chrome. Yes, it will, Roger. It will conflict with Prettier, and you can turn one off and put the other one on. It's up to you which one you want to use. I use Prettier personally. All right, and then there's Debugger for Microsoft Edge. I have all three because sometimes I want to do that, as well as Debugger for Unity because I play games, or I make games. So you don't need that, but the debuggers are really important for you to have. Document this. This is super important. Highly recommend. It doesn't really tell us how many downloads, but I think it's really, really good. It adds a lot of functionality when it comes to doing something like this, which is kind of adding comments or comment headers, which is good. Okay, so that's that one. Let's keep going here. Doxygen, if you want more extensive comments, this is very good as well, where you can add more comments to your code. I add a bunch of them, and the reason for this is because a lot of times I get like some really interesting comments I can do quickly, and I think comments are as good, to go through your code and add comments as you go. Easy snippet, not so important. Editor config for VS Code. I think this is really good, a useful one. So again, 3 million downloads, highly recommend this one. EJS language support, this is 300,000. it adds additional things onto not just detecting EJS like the other one did, but adding actual language support in terms of code coloring. So that's pretty cool. ESLint. Okay, now, with linters, I have to tell you that I like them and I hate them at the same time. I like them because they give you some code hinting when it comes to ECMAScript, as an example in general. And I hate them because sometimes they bug me with all the warnings they give me. But it's not a bad thing to have a linter, and a linter basically helps you kind of help you with style, helps you with code hinting and that kind of stuff. And this is 14 million downloads, so it's well maintained. It's really popular and important, and it's starred because it's kind of like what they think is essential. Anytime you see one of these, they might say this is an essential one. I don't use both though. You don't use JSHint and ESLint at the same time. I don't use those. They kind of bug me. So it's really up to you if you really want to. Explore exclude. That's probably with another package. Format in context menus, not a bad thing. So you can actually select the context menu and right-click and format your code. So you can add formats. Not bad. 55,000 downloads, so not really that popular, but it's useful for me. Formatting toggle when I want to turn on and off formatting. Again, not really. I don't recommend that much. There's a bunch of Git stuff. So Git Gistpad, Git Graph, Git History, Git Project Manager, and stuff like that. Those are pretty cool, but not required. The git ignore thing is pretty cool because we're going to talk about what git ignore does. Git ignore is something that basically says ignore this file or folder. Again, we might get into that later on in this course. Git lens, super important. Highly recommend downloading this one. It gives you really great kind of visuals into your Git and GitHub. So 9 million downloads. Highly recommend this one for Git lens. So download that one. GLSL is cool if you're doing any kind of graphics, but we're not. And we're going to keep going into icon fonts. Icon fonts, what they do is you can add icon fonts like Font Awesome, and we're going to be talking about using Font Awesome later on today, if possible. IP address, I use this because it tells you your IP address that's local. Sometimes you want to do that when you want to do local testing with your local server, and it'll output, just like it does mine, your local IP address or even your global IP address if you click on it a couple times. So that's pretty cool. So JavaScript ES6 code snippets, not a bad idea. This is a pretty good one. Again, 5 million downloads. I highly recommend this one. So JavaScript ES6 code snippets. And it shows you how to use them if you want to do that. I won't be using it personally, but it gives you some really good support. I'm going to skip down to JSON to TS, JSON to TypeScript. So it converts it. As an example, you can use this one, but I don't really need it. Just keep going to the other stuff. Live share. Live share is a Microsoft thing, and I think it's great. If you're working with a partner and you want to share your code, one editor with them, you can do that. You can use live share, and so they can actually type into your code editor at the same time as you're working. And this also works with Visual Studio. So if you want to collaborate with another person, this is cool. Be careful with this because sometimes it can cause weird problems, and some professors don't like it. I don't really care about it, to be honest with you. I think it's pretty good. Live share audio, you can actually speak, kind of do over live share with Visual Studio Code, and live share extension pack adds those two things together. So it's up to you. So extension packs are cool because extension packs add a bunch of other extensions together where you don't have to download these things singly, which is what I'm showing you to do right now. Okay. I'm just going to keep going down the line here so we can talk about the better ones. NPM, I think this is pretty cool. Again, 3 million downloads, and what it does is allows you to on the command line, you can go or inside the there's an F1 kind of a command. And Visual Studio Code supports that, where you can kind of do an npm install without going and doing terminal commands. This is good if you like doing that kind of stuff. I like using terminal commands, so it's not really that helpful for me. npm IntelliSense, that's really good. They're using var as an example, but I think this is I would say an essential. It should be marked with one of these, to be honest with you. It's 3 million downloads, and what it does is it really tells you And it gives you code hinting on, if it's even, look, it tells you all if that thing's even installed. So definitely an essential npm IntelliSense. If you don't have this, download and install it now in your extension pack. All right, let's keep going. I know I'm going through a lot of these, but there's a lot. Prettier, there's that prettier one that I was talking about. Prettier or beautify, you can use one or the other. Sometimes they conflict with each other. I like prettier. I think it's pretty cool. And what it does is it, kind of code colors or organizes what your code is going to look like. And you can also customize this so it kind of arranges things the way you like it. Project manager not required. Python and Pylance when I do that. You can see that I got several different extensions. Regex, regular expression previewer, not a bad one to use if you're doing things like validation and regular expressions. You guys should have learned about regular expressions in your JavaScript course, or assess that one. There are other ones, Rust and rewrap, other things that you don't need. Let me keep going down here to make sure that you guys have the most useful tools. To-do highlighter, this is a really good one. You can type in to-do, and then what happens is it'll highlight that to-do in your comments wherever they are. So let's say I want to do these inside your code. It'll make a yellow highlight like this. Good one, 1.7 million downloads. I think this is really good to do. TS-lint, definitely download this one. We're going to be using TypeScript, and Microsoft recommends this. So TS-lint, I use that along with ES-hint or ES-lint, and that's pretty good. Okay, so TypeScript Hero is okay. I really haven't seen great effects of it, but anything with TypeScript is cool. Let's keep going. All right. Yeah, VTour is okay. Visual Studio IntelliCode, I think, is an essential. You could download this, 11 million downloads. If I don't know why Visual Studio IntelliCode isn't marked with one of these, it should be. Because it's awesome in terms of what it does in terms of code coloring and code hinting. So that's this one, VS Code, or VS Studio, Visual Studio IntelliCode, really cool. And VS Code Essentials, this is a pack, all right? So what it does, remember I told you I probably came from some kind of pack, it gives you all of these, all right? So this is why I think VS Code Essentials is a good one to start with. And if I miss something, it'll download and install it for you. Okay, so that's that one. The other one that I'm going to skip now, there's VS Code icons, which is pretty cool. That's where sometimes you see kind of my icons come up like this on the side, and VS Code icons does that. If you do, the other one that's an extension pack is this one, which is View VS Code Extension Pack. I think this is a great one because it adds some of the things we talked about earlier again. By the way, if you already have something and you have multiple extension packs that want to add something, they won't add it a second time if you already have it. So all this does is confirm that you have this one, okay? And for the most part, that's it. Okay, so that's, I mean, I know there's a lot of them, but what yours will do if you download and install those extension packs, and again, this is being recorded, so if I went too fast, it's okay. What you'll do is you'll see that your stuff will look closer to what my stuff looks like, okay? Whew. All right, there we go. So that's extension pack. I promised I would do that this week, and I did that this week, so that way you get it done. All right, so what does this mean, and how does this work? Well, the way we test it is we press Control backtick. Remember I talked about Control backtick, we get a terminal window. You can do it that way, or you can go to Terminal and go to New Terminal, either one, whatever one you want to do, right? Or you can go to View, and if you go to Terminal, that also opens it. So whatever you want. Notice when I do New Terminal, I get 2 of them, and I can go to the second one and delete it. I can add as many terminal windows as I want embedded in code. Cool. We had something called NodeMon work last time for us, but let's not do that right now. Instead, what I want to do is I want to install, I want to do an npm init before we start anything else. Whenever we have a server on the back end, which is this thing that we're showing you here, I want you to do an npm init, okay? Or if you're like me, you can do a yarn init. Yarn and npm are similar. Like I said, yarn is a wrapper for npm. I like yarn more, and I highly recommend yarn over npm. Let's do that. Yarn init. Yarn init will basically run a little wizard, a little question wizard on the bottom of your terminal when you run it. And what it will do, it'll say, hey, what is the name of your package? my name of my package is not week2c, but rather I want to put in the entire name of the package. For example, something like COMP229 summer 2021, and then it's week 2c. Notice that I'm putting everything in lowercase because that is the requirement, and then press enter. Okay, version. My version is going to be 0.0.1. You can keep it at 1.0.0. It doesn't matter to me, but again, I'm doing this for the first time. This is kind of our first week. We're going to build, like I said, every week, pretty much on the previous week, and press enter. Description. Demo project for COMP229. You can put capitals here in the, summer 2021 semester, and it's week 2, all right, because that's what we're doing. And then entry point, index.js is already there. In brackets, that's what the default is. If I just press enter here, I accept the defaults. And then the repository URL, I don't have that yet. Just press enter here. The author, that's me. You can put your name in there. And then the MIT license, let's leave that the way it is and press enter. Is it private? I don't care. And I've got this package.json file created. Notice on the left now I have 2 files, not just one. One of them is my index.js that I made by copying and pasting from NodeJS.org. And the other one is the package.json file that it was just created by using yarn init. If I click on yarn package.json, you can see that it has the details here. Could I have typed this by myself? Absolutely, but why when yarn will do it all for you perfectly without any kind of typing errors? That's what we do here. All right, cool. So we have this, and what I can also do is include something called scripts. Let's do that. So we'll say down here, we'll say, if I make a new entry in my package.json file like this. Notice if I do that, if I press the comma, like last time I didn't have the commas, but this didn't come up. If I want to do scripts, you can actually type in scripts. It'll give you a hint like this. And in scripts, you can say that I want my start script, right, to equal something like npm, right, or node. I can go node as an example, and the name of my file, which is index.js. All right, so that's what the start script will be if I really want that. So this is kind of, you can make other scripts that do other things. All right, it's up to you. And I kind of put my curly braces on top of each other because that's the way I code. You may not like that, but I find that it's easier for me to replace this as opposed to replacing the curly brace at the end and do some other thing there. All right, so now that I have this, then I can just type in, if I wanted to, npm at the bottom. Now if I did npm start, let's try that out. It's going to say server running. All right. So how did I do that? npm is Node Package Manager. Start is my start script that I just defined. Node is the command, node, and index.js is my file, index.js. So that's what this does. It runs it, and look it says I'm live on 127.0.0.1 on port 3000. How do I test that? I need to bring up a browser. Oh, excuse me. So if I go to localhost 3000 now, I'm going to see hello world. And you should see the same thing. Okay, now going back to you guys. Are you with me? Check mark if you're with me. X if you're not. Raja is check mark. Anyone else out there other than Raja? Alex says he's good. Jadu, yeah. Thank you. Hopefully you guys are all with me. And Hussein, thank you for that, guys. Okay, so I see some of you are with me. I'm going to move on, guys, for the purpose of just keeping things going. But so now, what the heck? What did I just get here? Well, let's do a right click here in our browser and go inspect. And if I do that and I look at my body tag, you can see that I've got some extra information here that was generated. I never did any of this stuff. This is not me. Where did this stuff come from, this script tag and all that kind of stuff? And yeah, what the heck is this pre-style word wrap stuff? Where did that come from? Well, that came from Node. That's where this came from. And notice that I have HTML and a bunch of links. But you can see that the defaults are, if I refresh here, that's all I got. All right, so it doesn't really do anything. It's pretty empty, actually. All I have is this pre-tag with the style of word wrap, and that's it. So that's not really great. And that's the response. So again, remember that we did a request to the system. The request went to the server, right? So if I was to do it again, if I press enter and I do it again, I just get hello world. If I do something else, if I said like, I want to see index.html, then you're going to get the same response. If I want to look at something like, let's give me anything, some garbage, then I'm going to get the same response. Why is that? Because it always responds for any request. It always responds with hello world. And that's bad. That's not really exciting. But here's something. Let me show you a glitch. And this is where, or not a glitch, but something that doesn't make us happy. What if I wanted to change this from hello world? So I went here to my server and it changes to goodbye world. Goodbye world, right? And you know, I want to say goodbye. So I'm saying goodbye. Good. I saved the file. You can see I saved that. And if I go back to my browser and refresh, I still get hello world. Why is that? Why am I getting hello world even after I've updated my code as an example, and I've, you know, I changed the response to goodbye world? Anyone have a kind of a thought about this that's physically here in class today? What do you guys think? Why do you think I'm getting, even though I put goodbye world, I'm still getting hello world? Why is that? Well, no one really seems to know, but let me, not sure. I didn't restart. Hey, Aaron, one person listened to me from last week. I talked about this. When I created an object, right? I created the server object here. I instantiated it, right? Once I instantiate the object, I'm listening for the way the server has been configured, and it never changes until I restart the server. So the way it was configured before, when I started the server, right? It was hello world. So that's why it's always going to be hello world until I restart. So if I for me to restart, I got to stop, Control C, right? And I say I want to stop the bash job. And then I got to restart the server. So I'm going to just do the same command. So it's going to be npm start again. I start the server again. And when I go back to this, and if I refresh, now I get goodbye world. Now it works, okay? But Yarn doesn't auto-update. No. So that is something that happens. So goodbye world, right? So, and that's why it's important to run something like NodeMon. Let's try this out. So if I Control C and I kind of get out there. So let's go clear. By the way, you can change the terminal type. Right now, I'm showing command, right? You can also just kind of describe which one I want. I want a PowerShell. PowerShell gives me more control, right? I can do that too. Instead of using npm start like I did before, it does not do that anymore. Let's just do a NodeMon. Remember NodeMon we installed last week? If I do that, I get this, right? Which is NodeMon version 2.07. I'm still starting node index.js. That's why I need that start script, this part, right? I need this, right? But it's running on 127.0.0.1.3000. When I go back to this and I refresh, we have goodbye world. Let's pull this to the side like we did last week. So I'm pressing on my command key or on the Mac or my Windows key on Windows. So window to the right, and it kind of pulls us to the right. And then I'm going to put window to the left. So I'm going to pull that to the left. So now I can see both windows side by side, right? And here, notice that I want to change my script. So instead of my index.html saying goodbye world, I want to say that it's hello world again. So hello world. That's the right way to do it. I want to save this. Notice how it automatically started the server again, restarted right away. As soon as I saved something or changed a script, it restarted. And now if I refresh, it says hello world, okay? So that's why we use NodeMon. It's a good tool. And every time we change something and restarts, we always get the latest version here. Questions around this? Are we good? If we're good, I'm just going to move on. All right, so that is the first thing. So remember that whenever we instantiate an object of type server, right? That's what we're doing here. We create the server for the first time, and then once that server has been created, it's created for life. And what I mean by that is using Node, whatever server we make, as soon as I start listening on the server and I launch my server by doing the node index.js, the node command, this is where I say, hey server, start listening, right? As soon as I do that, then whatever the configuration was when I started the server is there for life, unless I restart the server. Okay. Is this similar to the go live? I'm not sure. Not sure what that is. All right, so let's go over here on the left. You can see we have HTTP. We can see require, which is this HTTP. Require says, I want a module. Because Node by itself, it's bare bones. It doesn't have any of this stuff. For example, if I took this HTTP away by commenting it out and saving, right? It's going to give me this error. It's going to say, I don't know what HTTP is. Because HTTP is, even though it's built in, it's a module that's built into Node.js. We don't have to download anything. There's nothing that has to come in my packages, my package.json here. But even if I want to use it, I have to require it. And by me requiring HTTP, I attach it to my Node.js configuration. That's what I'm doing here, right? Really, it's a basic, kind of module that's required for the most part in every server, right, that I've ever seen in one form or another. Whether it's wrapped up with Express or whether I use it directly, I need to use require HTTP many times or HTTPS. Okay, one of the two. It's the module that I'm doing. So the require is a way of me attaching JavaScript here as an example without needing an index.html page. Okay, that's what it is. Here's something else that I want you to know, right? So let's put that back. Let me undo that change and save. You can see now that it started the server and I don't have that error anymore. So I got this really big error and it's like scary sometimes. So you're like looking at this and going, what the heck? What does this mean? And notice that this is the console log here, not here. So if I go to console here, there's nothing. Because anytime we do console log with Node.js, it's done on the server side, which is here, not on the browser side or the client side, which is here. When you guys did client-side scripting, COMP229, then all your console logs happened here, not here, okay? Not so much anymore, right? So we're still going to do this part, but you notice here is we have this thing, and it says, it gives an error. It says reference error. It points to HTTP not defined here. This is the error where I got it. And this is important. It also tells you the line number. Index.js, line number 6. Right here. This is where the problem was. So this is pretty good kind of error debugging. It tells us where the problem is in our code. And what this really here is down here, all these things, this is kind of the run stack, right? That's what this is. So you can see that we start off running, I execute my user entry point, I do my load module, and then once I come up to my compilation, when I compile my code, I got an immediate error, and the error came up as right here. Okay, that's where the error came from. And when I restarted, when I saved everything and it worked properly, I restarted my server and all things are good. Notice I'm using const. Why can I use const? Because none of this stuff is going to change. I'm not going to change my require. So there's no point using a variable here. I might as well make it as a constant because this is a module. I'm saying, hey, I want to include the HTTP module that's built into Node.js. So I'm going to make it a constant. I'm not going to change my host name, so that's a constant. And I'm not going to change my port, so that's a constant. And guess what? I'm not going to redefine my server, right, ever. So that's a constant. And that's why I can use const here. All right, so that's kind of the first step in the large world of Node.js. One thing to note is let's go back to nodejs.org for a second. And in nodejs.org, let's go back to docs. And let's go back to guides. And under guides, it says how to debug. There's a bunch of really cool things, Dockerizing your Node application. We'll get into that maybe later on this semester. And it talks about the overview, core concepts, so things that I've probably somewhat covered in my PowerPoints that are covered in more detail here. This is a great thing to read if you're interested. But there's also something called V16 API or the V14 API. I think this is good. Let's take a look at V16 API. Then we can look at a specific module. So if I go to HTTP, that's the module I just used. And as an example, I scroll down. You can see that these are all the different methods that are associated with that module. So here's my HTTP module, right? I need to use require HTTP. It tells you that, right, as an example. And it talks about each of the methods associated with module. HTTP has an agent method, as well as other methods that are here. Create connection. These are all methods that are coming with HTTP. But what about if I wanted to get code hinting? So if I did something like, hey, HTTP dot, and then you can see that Visual Studio Code gives you some common modules that are built in. The GET requests, a request, as an example, and so on. Not all of them, but the majority of them are right here. So here's agent, right, that we just saw. And if I say something like agent dot, you can see that it gives you code hinting for what it knows what to do. Okay, agent dot, but notice agent dot create connection, right? So if I said HTTP, and if I want to go agent, right, dot create connection, I don't have that. It doesn't come up, even though it's listed right here, right? How about agent dot keep socket alive, right? So agent dot keep socket alive. It doesn't show me that. So how do I get better code hinting than this? Well, one thing to do is we can use TypeScript, right? We can use TypeScript to get better code hinting. Not sure what that is, Hussein. You shouldn't get PowerShell problems. It works fine for me. It could be a security issue on PowerShell, though. Just letting you know. Okay, so you may want to look that up with. There might be a fix by going on to things. So if I looked at something like NodeMon and PowerShell, so if I did like NodeMon and PowerShell error, then you might see that there is a cannot load. And it talks about how to go into PowerShell and to do set execution policy on restricted. I think this is important to do, right? And once you do that, that will do everything you need. But you need to go into PowerShell, and you need to do this in admin mode, administrator, right? So make sure you're in as administrator in Windows PowerShell, and you put in set execution policy as unrestricted, and you should alleviate that problem. Okay, let's go back to what I talked about before. So I was talking about how do I get better code hinting? Well, if I can do that by using TypeScript. So TypeScript, remember, just to remind you what TypeScript is, if I go to typescriptlang.org, then if you notice here, it allows me to do better code hinting for JavaScript, but not just on the front end, but also on the back end. But instead of actually using this as a TypeScript module, I can actually include a package that gives me code hinting, right? And I can do it specifically for Node. Okay, let me show you how this works. So we'll do one at a time, and we'll get into this. Okay, so I'm going to just make this large. So I'm going to use the window key right arrow to make this large. I'll be okay. Woohoo! And there we go. And what I want to do is go back to my command prompt here, right? And I'm going to type in yarn add, and then @types. So @types says I want to get type hinting. I want to get code hinting for something. In this case, I'm getting code hinting for Node. All right, so @types, and then /, and then the module that you want to get code hinting for, Node, and then we want to use --dev for yarn. So yarn add @types /node --dev. And if you did that, and if you press enter, it's going to install a new package, right, inside of your package.json. It'll be placed inside of types/node. Notice that the code, what it supports is version 15.3 and above. That's what it's supporting right now. Okay. And just notice, I'm just pointing this out to you. So now that I've installed this, right, in my package.json file, notice it also created a new folder in my project called Node Modules. Okay, there's my new project in my package, Node Modules. And if I look into that package, I have @types. And if I look in there, I have a bunch of other ones like fs, DNS, assert, util, and a bunch of other things like HTTP. Look, there's HTTP. And so HTTP is a file that describes all the different methods that come with HTTP. It's a description or a, any .d file, right, is a type definition file. So this describes all the types for Node.js and gives me all code hinting. And by the way, this works for almost any popular JavaScript library out there. If I go @types jQuery, it'll do the same thing, okay? So that's what it does, @types, and then yarn add. So yarn is like npm, like we talked about before. Add replaces install. So yarn add is the verb, and then the module is called @types/node, okay? And then --dev. By the way, it also produces something called a yarn lock, all right? You can't use yarn and npm, it'll conflict, so please use one or the other. I'm going to be using yarn. You can use npm if you want, but the result will be the same. You'll have an npm.lock file, a package.json.lock. Here I'm just using a yarn.lock, which is fine. Yes, Patrick, you can get 3 accepted types because an object can be different types in JavaScript. Remember? A number or a string array, right? That's what it is. So, so let's go back. Let's go back to this. And if I save this and then look at my index.js now, well, I get some differences here, yeah? Look at create server now. It's giving me some different stuff. HTTP, it sees it as a module HTTP. Server is now an http.server. That's different, right? Hostname is the hostname still. Port is still the port because it still is not a TS file. It's a JS file, okay? I'm just pointing this out so you know we're going into little bitty steps for everything we need. So what about if I wanted to get that, HTTP stuff again? If I said something like, hey, HTTP, I want to use the agent and then dot. Do I get additional things here? Well, no, but it gives me the same stuff as we did before, HTTP agent dot, right? But here's something that I can do. If I said something like, if server is my HTTP, right, I can make a reference to HTTP, right? So server is a HTTP server. I use create server for this, http.create server. I can do the same thing. Like I say HTTP dot, and you can see that these are the most common things that I can do: a server, an agent, a client request, an incoming message, and others. And I will get great code hinting now with anything I use. And it's very similar to what I got before because I have to tell you that Visual Studio Code actually adds a lot of this out of the box for us without me having to do this thing with package.json. But I wanted you to understand how to get perhaps better code hinting than we had before. All right, so cool, HTTP dot, and then what about if I did server dot? So server is something. What about if I did that? If I said something server dot, and you can see I have all these things and with a lot of detail. These are all the things that I'm going to be able to get now with server, and I'm going to get a lot of detail here because of my my index.d.ts file that I'm using for each of these things. Cool. So this is cool, and it gives me some code hinting, but I can still do weird things, right? I can still do really weird things. Like, what if I said something like, server.http lock, right? Yeah. And if I did that, and I made this up, by the way, HTTP lock is this unknown word, but who cares? And if I say something like, let my variable, right, equals to this server.http lock, and I did that, it's not going to complain, right? Until I run it. If I run it, if I go back to here and I run it, right, and if I save, well, as long as I don't try and access my variable, let's say, for example, I do something like console log, right, my variable, right? If I did that here, and if I save it, it's going to say, I don't know what you mean. It's undefined, right? I mean, but it didn't complain beyond that. It just says, I don't know that word, HTTP lock. Maybe if I even redid it, like I said, HTTP lock, it looks official, doesn't it? Like HTTP lock is a thing. By the way, it's not a thing. I'm just making it up, right? And so I just get this undefined down here, but I don't really get an error up here at all, do I? Right? So that's not really cool. And we still have the same problems here that we would normally have with JavaScript, right? And so we need to use something going forward that can help us with this thing, like I talked about before. TypeScript is your answer. But in order for us to use TypeScript, we need additional support. And again, there's nothing wrong with doing what we're doing, right? The only thing that we want to think about, and I'm just telling you this from a setup perspective, is if we have to set up the TypeScript compiler options, because remember, JS computes, right? You know, the Node.js understands JS, but it doesn't understand TypeScript, and neither does the browser. Browsers don't understand TypeScript, and we have to actually transpile from TypeScript into JavaScript. Okay, so this is something to note. So before we start that journey, which we're going to start today, right? Now, again, my videos online, if you really don't want to use TypeScript, guys, and if you feel uncomfortable with it, I'm not going to push you to. You can always do everything that I'm doing here without TypeScript. Okay, however, I highly recommend it. It's going to be way easier, and it's also going to make your resume much better if you know how to use TypeScript, especially on the back end with Node. So how does this look? How do you do TypeScript? Well, the first thing we need is a tsconfig.json file. So let's add that in. So a new file, tsconfig.json. Here's tsconfig.json. The way it starts off is we need to have curly braces. All right. There is no, I would say, there is no wizard to have this done. You have to do it manually for yourself. But the first thing you need is something called compiler options. So we need to kind of type in compiler options. If I type the quotation marks, I can specify compiler options. That's the first thing. And I need a compiler options object. I mean, again, I'm just putting this in 2 lines just to make it super clear. So compiler options is the first thing. Under compiler options, I want to specify the target. So let's make the target. We did this actually earlier. I want to specify, if you take away the brackets, I can specify any version that we talked about before. I want to specify ECMAScript, at least ECMAScript 6. So please choose ECMAScript 6 right here. So target is ECMAScript 6. Next, the module. I want to choose the module pattern, which is going to be CommonJS. All right, CommonJS is the module pattern that we're going to use. This is the way we connect. It's not required that we talked about earlier, right? I want to turn source maps on for code hinting. So let's turn that to true. I also want to use no implicit any. So I don't want ever to have an object that's not defined with a type. So I want to turn that to on. I'm always going to say always strict. So strict is going to be true. I'm always going to say everything that I do with TypeScript and JavaScript from now on is going to be strict. And I also want to remove comments. So when I transpile from TypeScript to JavaScript, I don't need the comments on the JavaScript file, only on the TypeScript file. That's where we're going to be developing on it. So true. And then here's something that's new. Our module, if I type in ES module interop, right? I want to turn that to true. You need that on for module pattern, interoperability. We need for Node. This is something only for the backend, as well as module resolution must be Node. Oops, undo. What happened there? Module resolution must be Node, all right? Okay. I also want to, that's pretty much our compiler options. So again, I've included all of these as compiler options, right? And the reason why I've done this is when we start going with TypeScript, I want you guys to have the same configuration that I do, right? One more thing. I want to exclude, I don't want ever to calculate anything to do with node modules, because node modules also include TypeScript files, and we never want to deal with those, the ones that someone else has created for us. We only want to transpile our own. So we want to exclude node modules from being transpiled. Please do that, okay? And that is our TypeScript configuration file. Notice I have a bit of an error. And the reason why I have a bit of an error, because I haven't set up the way to do that. Aaron says, can you please show the resource to learn TypeScript with Node? Yeah, this is it right here. You and me. I'm showing you how to use TypeScript with Node. There isn't a lot of great resources like that, Aaron, to be honest with you. I'm doing it with you, so that's why these courses are super important, and I'm recording this for you so you know what to do. Okay? I'll be honest, it's trying to find it. You could find good resources out there. I just haven't found something I'm satisfied with to share with you. All right, but there's tons and tons of stuff you can Google if you really wanted to. But this is kind of the first piece. The first piece is, hey, can I turn on these compiler options? The first thing, and the next thing I want to do is I want to change my index.js over here. Take a look. I want to change my index.js. I want to right click and I want to rename it. And I want to rename this to index.ts. When I do that, I'm probably going to starting to get some errors in a second. Take a look how I'm getting some errors, right? Like it doesn't know what these things are, right? And then what I want to do is I want to transpile automatically, right? So one thing is, in order for me to convert from TypeScript to JavaScript, I need to actively do something, right? It doesn't do it automatically, right? However, there's two ways to do this. I can go into my command prompt and I can manually type in, let's just do a command prompt. I can manually type in TSC, and then if I press enter, it's going to transpile. That's what it does. And it's going to give me any errors. When I type TSC, that's TypeScript compile, that's what it's going to do. Then notice that what happens is it takes my index.ts, this is my file, and it converts it to index.js. Notice it just takes away the spaces right now because they're almost identical, and it converts it from TypeScript to JavaScript, and that's the one I need. Remember, in my package.json, I specified that I'm going to start my index.js, not TS. TS is for us. JS is for the compiler, for Node, right? So we want the JS files, but we start with the index file, okay? The TS file. Notice also it warns us that it doesn't know what request is and it doesn't know what response is. It doesn't know those two things. It has no idea what those two things are. That's important to note. Okay, so what's next? So that's the first part. So the first part is, hey, let's install TypeScript. But now we have an error, and it'd be really weird if I had to come here every single time manually and type in TSC. If I forget, that's going to be another block to my development. I don't want to do that. So I want to use something automatic. And you can do that with built into Visual Studio Code. You can use Control-Shift-B. Control-Shift and B together, or Command-Shift-B on the Mac, pulls up this menu. Now I can choose this watch task. I can build, that does it once, like down in here, or I can choose watch. If I choose watch, what it does is it does the same steps, but now it's an open little window, and then it'll keep on transpiling every time I make a change, similar to NodeMon. Okay? I need to fix this problem. And the way I can fix this problem, instead of using a require, which is the way we would do things with Node, we're going to use an import. So that's the new way of doing things, right? So again, this is why this class is what it is. Remember, the recording that I have on the course shell shows you the old way. So if you're not comfortable with doing what I'm doing here, it's totally okay. It's not a problem. Okay, you're not going to get messed up by it. It's still going to work the same way. So how do you do it the new way? You change const for the module to an import. You say import HTTP, right? And instead of using require, we don't need to use require. We change the form to look like this: from HTTP and then colon, like this. Now, once we've done this and press save, it takes away our errors. So now our request, it can see it as an HTTP incoming message. And the response is recognized as an HTTP server response, which is way better. And why do we do all this, guys and girls? Because of this. Because this does not compute, my friends. We have no idea what the heck this is. Because I remember I made it up, and there is what I wanted. I wanted TypeScript to complain to me and say, Tom, what are you doing? What is HTTP lock? Remember, I made this up. It means nothing. I want that, because if it means nothing, it's useless. And we can make mistakes just like this. So this is how we're going to start. We're going to start with a new form. It's almost identical to what I showed you earlier, but it gives us amazing code hinting, which is going to help you throughout your entire journey if you follow along with me. Okay, so that's how it works. So let's get rid of these two things because they do not compute. And when we go save now, you can see that there are no errors. When I transpile, it looks almost identical. Take a look over here, where you can see that it does some other fancy stuff in the background. In fact, it even converts it into vars. Why? Because Node.js, no matter what it does for full compatibility, right, it does some fancy stuff like this. Remember, what var is good for is it does hoisting. That's what it's for. And then what it does is it defines a custom type called import default. This is something called a shim that works so that it's compatible. And you don't have to know any of this stuff on the JS side. You don't even care about the JS side anymore. All you care about is that you're not getting any errors on the TypeScript side. If you don't get any errors here, it's going to work perfectly here. Okay, that's what I care about for you. Couple things to note. You can also be explicit. You can do types like we did before. So you can say hostname colon. We know it's of type string, so you can be explicit. Or you can be implicit. Implicitly typed means whatever I assign to it, it accepts. This obviously is a number. We can say that it is of type number. So you can be explicit. And what this does, being explicit, is it actually gives the person who's reading your code more understanding of what everything is. So server, you can see that this is of type http.server. If I really wanted to, instead of doing it this way, I could do that, right? I could say something like http.server. That's the type. So colon says anything after the colon, that's the type I'm assigning to that particular identifier, right? Type hinting. So server, which is of type HTTP server, is equal to a new, I want you to think about a new keyword in here, because this create server is a server factory. It returns a new object of type server and assigns it to this server identifier. That's what it does. Status code is a number, right? And if I did that, if I said status code, which is a number, I'm trying to define a status code, but status code has already been defined. For example, if I hover over res is a HTTP server response, and if I hover over status code, we can see that that is indeed a number already, okay? I don't have to redefine it because that's not mine. I'm not defining it like this. It's already been defined. So I don't put a type for something that's already been defined. We can always inspect the type just like we would in C# if I just hover over. Hover over, I get the type. Hover over, I get the type. And I get really good type hinting now with TypeScript. Super good. Okay? Okay? Lots of good support. And this is what you were missing as an example when you were doing things with JavaScript in COMP229, right? You're missing good type hinting support because even though JavaScript is loosely typed, it does have types. It has a number type. It has a string type. It has an any type. It has other types, an array type, and so on. All right, are you with me? So this is pretty cool, right? This is HTTP. I want a module from HTTP. I can, kind of, set this up as an example. And then what I have is a bit of some code that I can use to output. But I really want to read a file, right? And I can't really read a file from here. All I'm doing is basically setting the header and then outputting this. So let's see if we can figure out if I wanted to show a file, how would I do that, right? I mean, this is kind of the beginning of everything. And I think part of the thing that we want to start thinking about is, how do we get to something that's more meaningful with JavaScript, as an example, as opposed to the stuff that we're looking at right now. This doesn't do much, is what I'm saying, right? We want to make it do more. And the way to do more is to, kind of push our boundaries a little bit with an understanding of what TypeScript will do for us. Okay, so that's something that we want to think about. All right, so let's add some more things. I want to add not just HTTP, because this is pretty cool, right? But I want to think about doing some stuff with other modules, right? Because again, I want you to think about that. This module here, HTTP from HTTP, this is actually a built-in module that's been pre-compiled with Node.js. Okay, there isn't anything you have to download as an example or install in Node.js. It's just part of Node.js itself, right? So there's nothing to do there, right? So I mean, I'm pointing this out because you're like, wait, where did he get this module? This module comes with Node.js, right? So that was kind of the one question I always get from students is like, where is that coming from? So let's go back to the documentation here. So if I go back to the documentation for here, this is Node documentation, right? And this is for the HTTP module. There's also something called the path module. Let's look at that path module for a second. So path, what it does is I can get, the path of my directory, right? That's what I can do. So let's start doing that a little bit as well. So let's import path. Let's do the new one. So here's import path from, and if you look at, these are all the modules that I can get. If I start typing path, the P, it kind of comes up as path. So here's path. Notice that this is kind of dimmed out, whereas HTTP here is lit up because we're using HTTP, right? This is a module we're actually using, but path is something we haven't really touched yet. And what I can do with the path module, right, as an example, is I want to be able to, I can look at a bunch of things that path gives me. So let's see what path can do for me, right? So again, if I do a console log, and if I go to path dot, and notice it says dir name, that is directory name. So path dot directory name, and I want to output that, right? When I run my server, if I press save here, I can kind of get the directory name. We're going to use the dir name in different ways though. There's other ways to get directory names. So if I go back to my node, you can see that I might get something that pushes out the path. But see, function dir name doesn't really do much yet. So dir name dot, and then dir name is yellow. So that means it is my directory name, okay? But path also allows to output directory name. There's actually an _ dir name macro that exists in Node that I can use. So if I did this _ dir name and press save, right? Then I actually get my whole directory name, C:\\, not sure if you can see that, guys. Silly, that's my name, OneDrive, Desktop, Centennial, COMP229, Week 2C. That is my whole directory name right here. And a lot of times what we want to do is we want to attach things or add things to the directory, all right? And for that, we can do things like, hey, I want to, when I do a search for stuff, as an example, I want to be able to add my directory name to the path, right? And how do I do that? The other thing that's a very common thing to do is I can import my file system, FS, my file system. And my file system, I can, just like I did, from FS, I can do this too. So file system is interesting as well. What file system allows me to do is I can look at, I can read a file, right, as an example. So let's make a file to read from, right? Right now we don't have a file. As an example, we have index.ts, but I would like to have an index.html. Let's do that. So instead of like us doing this eventually, I want to output an HTML file. So I want to go to New File, and first of all, click out here. Before you do that, it'll also go by default inside the Node modules folder. So click out here and press New, and then type in index.html, just like we've done in the past. I want to use HTML5, which is emit for a quick emit abbreviation. Press colon, and it'll give me this. And then in my document, I want to push out what the name of my file is. So my title for this thing is going to be something else. It's not going to be just document. It'll be something like, COMP229 in the summer 2021 semester, and it'll be something like, week 2. Okay, something like that. So that'll be my document. And then what I can do in the document body is put in a h1 tag with, hello world. That's a little bit more detailed than what I had before. And I want to use this document to output. I want to read this document. So how do I read this document? How do I do that? Right? Well, in my index.ts, so I have again, all I did was make a simple HTML file with no CSS or anything. Just a very simple HTML file with a hello world. Okay, that's what I've done. What I want to do is my index.ts, this is the server. I want to be able to read the file. So let's do it again. So I'll say something like this. I'll say, hey, file system, I want to read file. I want to read my index.html file. That's what I want. Notice what it says. These are the requirements. Here's the path. And these are not optional. I need a path or a path-like object. And then I need to have an option. Okay, that's what I need to have. I need to have this. It's not an optional thing, right? So what I need to put in here after the path is some kind of callback function, which is an error. Let's just say an error and some data. And what I want to do with this thing is I want to pump out, right, a little callback function. So error, if I hover over that, is a Node.js error number exception, right? And data is my buffer. Think about the buffer as all the bits that I'm going to read in from my index.html. I'm going to read each character in the HTML file, and I'm going to put it inside of a buffer. When you hear the word buffer, I want you to think about that the only thing that you're doing is you're creating an array of data. That's what a buffer is. So here, going back to my index.ts, I'm reading my data into the buffer. My data is actually my code. That's what it is. Let's do some additional hinting. What I want to do here is I want to do a console log of the data. Let's print out that data. Let's see if we can see my index.html when I read it. I read in my index.html, right? And then I want to output it. So if I do this and I save it, you can see now I get a buffer of data, but it is the buffer that I'm getting is data that's been turned into a bit stream, all right? So you can see that it's not quite what I was expecting. 3C, 2.1, this is all assembly code. That's what it is, or byte code, if you will. And that's what this data turns out to be. When I read index.html, which is this, it converts it into a bunch of data. And what I want to do with the read file is I also want to check to see if there's errors, because what if I get errors reading the file? What if index.html doesn't exist? So what I can do here is say something like, if there's an error, notice that it lights up now. if there's an error, then I want to respond. I want to respond with something. Okay, that's what I want to respond with something. I want to respond with a 404, right? So I want to almost do like a console log, error. That's what I want to do kind of thing, right? If there's an error. Otherwise, I want to output my data. This idea of reading a file and outputting the data is what I want to do instead of redoing a res end. I don't want to do this res end, okay? But let's make a function for that, right? Let's make a function that lives down here. We'll make a new function for ourselves, just like we normally do. And we're going to say, we'll call this function display home. My display home function is going to return void. It's not going to return anything. But it's actually going to do all of this stuff. This file system stuff is what the display function is going to do. So it's going to say, hey, my display function is going to actually read the file, right? That's what it's going to do. And what I need also, my display function is also going to have a response object, right? The response object, just like we had a response object up here, where the response object was of type HTTP server response. That's what I want this response object to be here. So let's type that in, of type HTTP server response. So I'm kind of telling the function what type the parameter is going to be based on what we already saw. So that's my display home function. Now that I have this, if there's an error, what I want is I want to respond with, I want to write my head just like I've done, a header up here with a status code. I want to write head with a status of 404. I want to say that remember 404 is like an error, unknown or not found, right? And then what I want to do is I want to respond.end, and I want to say error. This is the stuff that's going to print to the page. Error 404, right? Page not found, right? I don't need to console log. This error is to our console here, right? The next thing I want to do is if there's no error, so if I have an error, that's what it's going to do. But if I don't have an error, then this data log, again, if I go back to my data here, and if I refresh the page, you see I still get this hello world. I don't get anything else. And it didn't do much over here, okay? But what if I don't get an error? I want it to return, right? And I want my data, I want to write head 200. I'm going to say if there's no error, I want to say that everything's okay. And I want a response.end data. I want to output my data, as a response. That's what I want, okay? And what I want to do is this display home function, right? I want to, instead of doing this, right, and a status code of 200, let's take away the status code for a second, right? Because we don't know what the status code is going to be, right? And instead of res end hello world, let's change this to display home, and I'm going to pass in the response object, right? Because this response object that comes from the server is going to be passed into the display home function, which needs the response object to write out to the page. And let's see if it messes up. So far, so good, right? What happens now when I go here? If I refresh, do I get that page? Well, I actually get something funny. I get the page printed out, but not as what we thought. It actually prints out the data that I read from the index.html page, right? And that's the first step. First step is, hey, can I output this page? Remember, why does it do this? Well, because I told it that the content type is text plain, right? That's the content type that I told it to be, right? But is this really text plain? What is this thing? It's not text plain. It's HTML, right? So let's look at content types. So if I were looked at, HTML content type. What does that look like? These are different MIME types, right? So text HTML, text calendar, there's different MIME types. You can look at common MIME types. And MIME, as an example, is the format, if you will, of a file, right? So you can see there's different type of MIME types. And if I want to look at .html, it's text HTML. You can actually search for it. So here's HTML or HTML. The MIME type is text HTML. So let's change this to text HTML, save. And if I go back to this and refresh, then I get hello world. And my friends, this is our first page. So I used a couple of tricks here to do this, not lots, just a couple, right? And I talked about a bunch of little things here, right? I talked about how we're using the HTTP module, right? And we're using TypeScript instead of the require pattern that we've seen in the videos that you might see, the most common videos, right? This is the structure, right? Let's clean this up a little bit. And what I'm doing here is I'm saying I'm still going to make a server. That's not changed. But instead of me responding with some text, plain text, I'm responding with HTML. Now this is very, very limited. Why? What if I had CSS? If I had a CSS file or a JavaScript file or something else, it would not know how to respond. And we're going to get into how to handle different MIME types later on next week when we start using Express, because Express has a lot more functionality than this. This is just Node. That's what this is. Node and nothing else. I'm just using the Node modules by itself. Could I build my own server with Node by itself? Yes, but it would take me a while. It would take a lot of code for me to do what I want to do. And there's another great library we're going to learn about next week called Express. And Express handles everything that we need, including MIME types like CSS, JavaScript, HTML, and a bunch of other types of files that we want to read. SVG files, PNG files, other things where I don't have to specify every single type manually. It does it all for me, right? And if I look at the Getting Started guide for Express, it's pretty simple. We've already installed Express Generator, but next week we're going to do a little hello world that looks more like this. Take a look at the difference. Here's all the code I need to, kind of output a very simple thing. But here what I'm doing is it also includes something called routing. And we're going to be talking about Express routing next week. Okay, to round out today, because I don't expect you guys to do this right now. We're going to handle this part next week, right? The only thing I want you to finish off with today is put this up on GitHub, right? And I want to go through the commands again. One thing I noticed, guys, for people who did the lab this week, some people gave me an empty repository. Some people gave me some other random Java code. Java and JavaScript, not the same. Some people gave me C# code. Some people gave me whatever, right? Some people gave me like a game. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the code I do with you, when you hand stuff in, and especially for your assignment 1, right? Every week counts. So please work with me on doing everything you need. Remember that if I don't cover something, it's going to be covered up on your in your course shell. So please read your course shell, and I can step you through some of the same things that I'm showing you here. All right, let's put this up on GitHub. So control backtick. I have a few options. One of them is this command. I'm going to go into the command line here, right? And I'm just going to do the commands step by step. Git init. It puts together a new Git repository. Git add dot adds everything to the staging area. Git commit -m, initial commit or first commit, adds everything, takes a snapshot of my files the way they are, including everything in Node modules. Now, sometime in the future, we may decide to exclude Node modules, and we'll do that with the .gitignore file. For now, we're including everything, okay? And then the next step is we need to push this to a repository online, but we don't have one right now. Let's make one. So again, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go to GitHub, Centennial College, and I'm going to add a brand new repository. So I'm going to click New. Please make sure, some people forgot to do this, they forgot to click public. And again, it was inaccessible to me. If you don't click public, then you have to add me as a collaborator, and no one did that. So please click public here and then type in your repository name. For example, COMP229 in the summer 2021 semester, and it's week 2. Week 2 C for you guys, because you guys are the C team. Okay, and then press enter. This is going to make an empty repository, and it gives us steering directions on how to use it. All I need now is the last 3 lines of code copied and pasted into a command prompt on the left-hand side, like this. Copied and right-clicked. And then when I do that and press enter, it's just going to push everything to GitHub. And if I refresh, you can see that I have everything here. Something else I got, guys, I have to tell you this, is I didn't just get this. This was inside of another folder. That is not going to work going forward. This has to be the root of your folder like this. In other words, index.ts or server.ts going forward has to be in the root of your folder for this to run online. So if you have all of this in another folder, that is not correct. So please don't give me that. Going forward, you'll lose marks if you do that kind of stuff. Now, there's no lab 2 this week, right? There's no lab 2. I'm not going to continue giving you more labs to do. You have enough work to do with assignment 1, but this is an example of what I need you to do. Please run this on your own. Consider this a lab, but for no marks. You know, as an example, try what I'm doing out with yourself, because when it comes to your midterm test, you are going to need to understand how to do all this stuff. And if you don't practice, it's going to sneak up on you, and it's going to be a lot of work. You can still do it, but it's going to be a lot of work and a lot of pain, as opposed to if you can do only a little pain by just going through this with me now. I just highly recommend it, okay? One thing we're missing is a README file. For example, online, we have this. I know I'm over time, guys. Stay with me for another minute or so. You see all this stuff here. I can add a README file up online. If I do this online, I can add a README file that says something like, you know, this is a demo project for COMP229, week 2, right? And if I was to commit new file, I can do that. You're going to see now that you have a little README file online, but guess what? We are 1 commit behind. So here we've got this up online, but here we're a commit behind. Let's do a git pull. And we do a git pull here. We're going to pull the new README file into our local folder structure. So now you can see that I have a README file that's here that I pulled from up online. Okay, that's what I did. Awesome. Everything is as it should be. We've got this. The only thing that's left is for me to put something like this up online, and I'll do that right now. So now what would I do? I take this file here. This is my GitHub repository, this whole thing. Okay, so in other words, I don't want, I'm just going to make this bigger so we can see it. So here's what I don't want, okay? So if I go to Centennial College, this is like your account, and I go to week 2 C, I want this thing right here. I don't want something else, just this. Some people have given me this, their whole account. That is not what I'm looking for. And I'm not looking for all your repositories equals to, or your packages. I don't want that either. I don't want this, okay? What I'm looking for is this, the name of your, github.com / the name of your account / your repo. That's all I need. People have not given me this. They've given me other things. So copy this. This is the link. And you're going to put this up on eCentennial. So on eCentennial, let me just go there now. Here's eCentennial. And here's, my, if you look here at my YouTube recordings, this is the YouTube recording. And I'm going to put underneath that my link to GitHub. So I'm going to go here. Actually, I'll make a new submodule for this week. and I'll put GitHub repos. GitHub repos. And in my GitHub repos module, I'm going to put everybody's repo from every class we do together. Okay, so I'm going to click on New. I'm going to go to Create Link. I'm going to copy that link in there, and I'll say GitHub repo for week 2C. That's you guys. And then create. And then what this is going to do is when you go there, you'll have an example of what I just did. All my code is here, right? So you can always refer back to this to get an idea of what I did for every week. And I do that every single time. Okay, so here's my completed code as an example in a zip archive for the thing that I did online. This video that I did here is the video that I had that I did for you guys for Node.js. One more last thing before we go. Remember that I've released assignment 1. There is a video for assignment 1 that I want you guys to watch. This is homework. Okay, so if you look at the video, right? So here's the assignment 1 details video. It's 9 minutes, right? So really today's homework is go over the video that I did without TypeScript. This is no TypeScript video, all right? So you can do it either way, with TypeScript, like I showed you today, and without TypeScript, like I showed you up here. Either way is acceptable. I'm okay with either way. You don't have to use TypeScript, okay? But please watch this video and this video, because if you don't, you won't know all the details for assignment 1, what I'm expecting from you, right? So please make sure you do that. And also, I've updated the assignment 1 document as well as the document for your personal demo video, which is now due next week by Friday. So if you look at last week's stuff, and if you go to down here into your personal demo video, you'll see that I've updated the document. So it says the proper date, which is Friday, May 28th, 2021 at midnight. Okay, that is the due date. And the way you would submit that is if you go to communication, and if you go to discussions, and if you look at the personal demo video, it should be now open and you can submit. I know some of you have submitted it under introductions. Please resubmit, leave those there. Don't do anything with that thread, but actually post your personal demo video here inside your personal demo video area. That will be where you get your 2% bonus. And again, it's due May 28th to accommodate those people who have not yet joined the course or who've just joined this week. Okay, so you haven't lost anything. Please do that here. All right, any questions before we go? I know we ran over time. If you don't have any questions, thank you so much. I'll see you next week. If you have questions, stick around and I'll try and answer any questions you have before we go. I'm going to stop recording here on YouTube and I'll see some of you next week. Remember that we don't have class on Monday. I'll be meeting and I'll be doing everything on the Wednesday class. I'll be recording on Wednesday, okay? Take care, guys. Good luck and enjoy the long weekend. Take care. So I'm just asking